Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Monday. Let's see, where is it? Monday, November 1st, episodes of Communication and Cigars. I'm your host, John Crook. Welcome. We are back live. So we've been out for a little bit here. Last couple weeks, actually 3 weeks to be perfectly honest with you, we've been out and about. Just busy doing some communication things. We're glad to be back. We are happy to be back. I like doing episodes. That's why I do them. But when it kind of came down to the point of saying, hey, do we not do an episode? Do we record it? I guess recording was better than nothing. So that's why we did recorded episodes. But tonight, I am broadcasting back live from Studio B. As you can kind of see here, why am I in Studio B? Because I am in Northwest Wisconsin and it was snowing today. Yeah, a little bit of snowing on there. So that's what it is. So good evening to Ben checking in tonight here on the chat here. What's tonight's subject going to be about? Well, tonight's subject is really going to go ahead and be about something that probably is going to make people upset. I don't know, left Twix, right Twix kind of thing. And the reason I say that is because guess what it's going to be talking about? It's going to be talking about the parts of the eCFR. Now, I said parts of the CFR, so it should have been eCFR on there. Title 47, to be exact, on there. So what exactly is Title 47? Well, Title 47 really deals with the aspects of the parts of communication on there as into what governs what. So what we mean by that is we mean like if I have a radio, and this is more the common one, I have a radio and I want to be able to use it in a certain band, okay, a certain frequency range or for a certain purpose. Guess what? The Title 47 of the eCFR is going to say, yes, you can use this radio in this band. The radio is type accepted to it on there. Now, the funny part about it is, especially when you start to go ahead and get into the aspects of what falls into what category, can I go ahead and, just, cut a resistor or a diode in the radio and transmit it on the other bands? Well, that's where it kind of gets a little gray, kind of gets a little shady in those kind of areas there. So we're not going to radio police it out tonight here, not in any way, shape, or form. But we are going to go ahead and do a little discussion about it to say, hey, what exactly is it all about? And we're going to kind of cover some of the parts on there. So if we take a look, when we discuss communications, there are a lot of different, how do we say, like entities or aspects of communication on there. And what I mean by that is that you have, for an example, you have amateur, you have marine, you have aviation. We don't talk about aviation too much, but marine, you have FRS, you have GMRS, you have MERS, you have business, you have public safety, everything like that on there. So what happens is that people, the radios are a certain type accepted. And that's what I usually see a lot, or I hear a lot of people say, and good case examples. We have people that buy amateur radios, right? You go and you cut the diode on the back. Everybody knows. You cut the diode on the back. What happens on it? The radio can transmit out of band, right? Can it transmit out of band? Is it legal to transmit out of the band? Well, we're not gonna go ahead and kind of break it down there, get so granular on it. But what happens is that it does set certain limitations. It does set certain, how do I say, laws that need to go into place. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to examine the different parts of the radio here. So we're going to go over part 80, part 90, part 95, those kind of things like that on there. But it'd be communications. And of course, it is cigars. So unfortunately, since I'm from Studio B tonight, we're not going to go ahead and have any cigars. So we'll let it by this week. But maybe the weather will get a little bit better, and eventually we maybe might get back in the garage and have some cigars on there. So either way, thanks for tuning in. Now, a couple exciting things that we're talking about here. Stay tuned to our channel. Keep in touch with it. We're going to do some pretty cool announcements. We're going to actually start to add, because I've had a lot of people say, hey, I would really, really, really love to be able to listen to your episodes. I can't necessarily watch it because I got to work or something like that. We're going to be doing some interesting things, adding some live audio streaming in the near future. So stay by for that. And then also too is check out. We're going to start doing a podcast on there. So I see a lot of people coming in there. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to run down the list here of seeing who is all checking in. So Ben, good evening. Ape, how are you doing this evening there? John, good to see you. Don, thanks for checking in. Liberty Cove, or no, I'm sorry, Liberty Cave. Can't read with my glasses right there. WS7PB, good evening on there. KK6USY, good evening. Chuck, Evan, good evening. So thanks for checking in here. Excuse me. Of course, getting over a little bit of a cold here. So that was also the nice part about not having to be live there. So let's dive right into it. Okay. We're going to start. And like I said, we're going to kind of go sort of number wise, but tonight we're going to be taking, once again, looking at those things. And I'll tell you this, when I started to do the research for this, I was actually pretty amazed at some of the things that even I, as a communication user, will do. And good evening to Ham Radio Do for just checking into. I was actually surprised at some of the things that I do with my radios. I'm like, whoa, we're kind of almost getting in there. And I'll tell you this, once again, we're not the radio police. I don't want anybody to be the radio police. Please don't, because it's always by definition. One thing I was very interested in how a lot of these different parts of eCFR Title 47 is licensed by rule versus license as an actual licensure. And then, of course, if you're in ham radio, you're going to know we're licensed to the band or the spectrum, or when you get into some of these parts, you're licensed to specific channels or you're licensed to specific frequencies on there. So let's hit it. So first of all, I'm going to talk about the Marine Band. Marine Band is pretty cool. So that actually falls under Title 47, Subchapter D, Part 80, Subpart A, 80.1C. So what does that all mean? Well, once again, that's the title of the code. If you want to check this out, hey, is he telling me the truth? Is he full of it? Check it out on there. That goes and states a ship station licensed by rule is authorized to transmit radio signals using a marine radio operating in the 156 to 162 megahertz range. So what that basically entitles, if you have a marine radio, the marine radio by all the manufacturers on there have been made, and with it being made, it boils down to saying, hey, if you're making this Marine Band radio, it's Part 80. It's got to be Part 80 certified. It has to fit into those channels that the Marine Band radio has. And the Marine radio range does go into a license by rule. So what that also states in there is that it does not require license if using the proper marine channels for the proper purposes. However, all ship stations licensed by rule must operate in accordance with the law. So what that means is that if there are certain channels on the Marine Band, which there are certain marine channels that in no way, shape, or form can you just chit chat on them. And there's also different marine channels which are used for, let's say, ship-to-shore communications, ship-to-ship communications, for other sort of activities on there, beaconing. There is some identification on there, like a signaling means on there. So you can't just go ahead and pick a channel, Park Island channel, saying, hey, I'm going to chit-chat on that channel anytime I want. No, Marine does have lists on there. Now, there's like, I can't even remember, like almost like 100 Marine channels on there. And there are different ways that are set up. There are some that are set up in a duplex or a simplex fashion. So simplex, obviously, as we talked about last week's episode, radio to radio on the same frequency. And then there are obviously duplex ones where you receive on one frequency, transmit on the other frequency. And they're all for different purposes on there. Okay. And once again, the channel is designed for specific purposes. Good example, Marine 16. If anybody's used Marine radio, guess what? Marine channel 16 is that distress, that calling channel on there. So if you are in emergency, hey, here's what it is. We're our ship is sinking. We're having issues of some sort or something like that. We need help. That's where you can go to Marine channel 16, much like CB channel 9. Back in the day, GMRS had that. FRS, I think, was like channel 14 or something, channel 7. I don't remember exactly off the top of my head. That is that Marine channel. So you can't go just to channel 16 and start talking. So, hey, don't do that on there. So Marine is pretty easy. It's pretty standard, pretty set forward. You don't have to really think too much about Marine when you're using it. And that's kind of why it's nice. A lot of Marine manufacturers out there, lots of them out there. But all of them, guess what, are the same frequency, the same channels, the same setup and everything like that on there. So let's get out of Marine. Let's go. And oh, by the way, I should, I guess, state the obvious. Marine channels are supposed to be used for marine purposes. Okay. So in other words, you're not supposed to be using marine radios to go bear hunting. Now, the only reason I say that is because I know people, and I do have some marine channels in my scanner that I will sometimes scan in the car and everything like that. And especially getting this time of the year into the fall season up here in northern Wisconsin, when bear hunting takes place, or deer hunting, even for that matter, people are using marine band radios illegally. All right. Even though you can buy, once again, marine band radio without a license, it's basically a, licensed by use or licensed by user, meaning you buy the radio, you're going to operate and use it properly. You don't need to get a license. So yeah, it's kind of, once again, you got to use the radios the right way. So let's talk about FRS. All right. FRS has actually gone under a big change. Okay. I know Ham Radio Dude just recently, he's in here tonight. He just did a review of a radio. Chuck, I think I see you in here tonight. I think that you're also doing a review or something like that on there. So with that being said, family radio service is very popular. And what recently happened with the FRS, so the FRS, if you take a look at the history of FRS, it was actually used for an interstitial kind of channel. So kind of like an intermittent or itinerant kind of thing, I guess you can kind of say, where you weren't using on the repeater frequencies, because FRS was kind of born out of GMRS. So with that kind of case there, it was a situation where people were saying, hey, I don't want to talk on a repeater because maybe there's no repeaters. I don't want to talk on the output of a repeater because I might be interfering with a repeater. So in that case, in that situation, that's where the FRS channels came in. And if you look at the frequencies of the FRS channels, you'll see that they are basically like 4-digit frequencies, as I kind of refer to them as. So like 462, I think it was like 5625. And they're in there because what's happening in there is that they're meant to be between the actual GMRS channel. So GMRS is like 462.550, 462.575. So you see kind of how it's like 462.5625. They're in there, they're narrow band, they're meant to be like set up like that. But there is a governance over it. So FRS used to be like half a watt, really restrictive, not a lot of power, because you didn't really want people to be using it long ranges, because if you did, it could actually interfere if you were running high power right near an actual GMRS channel. So, and FRS initially was licensed by rule, meaning you bought the FRS radio. And then when you bought that FRS radio, you in essence were buying the license of usage on it. So what happened in that case is that a lot of people started to use FRS, and it wasn't even allowed actually to be even used for business. You actually, even if you really want to go back, at the beginning, there was some usage of actually voice scrambler encryption on some of the FRS radios. But as time has morphed on, as time has continued, and like FRS usage has gained popularity and stuff, what actually happens is that it kind of changed a little bit on there. So what people were starting to do is they were starting to use it more and more for business. So the FCC said, let's redo it a little bit. So if you actually look, once again, per Title 47, Subchapter D, Part 95, Subpart B, 95.503, FRS is defined as family radio service is a short-distance two-way voice communication service with limited data applications between low-power handheld radios for facilitating individual, family, group, recreational, and business activities. So what happened was a lot of people would go ahead and they would actually be on there and they would say, they were using it for business, because who's going to go after a half a watt radio? But now they said, hey, guess what? You can go ahead and do that now. Now, it does not require a license, but there's restrictive parameters for operating. Okay. Restrictive parameters for operating. So what that basically means is that you have a radio that is Part 95 certified as part of FRS. You have 22 channels to really, for the most part, operate on. And that is channels 1 through 7. And 15 through channel 22 are capable now of 2 watts. So you actually have 2 watts of power that can come out of this radio. And at UHF with 2 watts, you can blow through some buildings pretty easily on there. Now, channels 8 through 14 are capable of a half a watt. So you're still actually half a watt on 8 through 14. Now you might ask, well, why is 8 through 14 only half a watt, where 1 through 7 and 15 through 22 are 2 watts? Once again, if you take a look at the frequencies on there, we're in between the GMRS channels. So when you're on channels 8 through 14, if you are close to a repeater, you may actually go into that repeater. You may overload the repeater because it's off frequency a little bit. So for example, 467.550 might be the input to the repeater. Well, if you're near the repeater and 467.5625, you may be able to still, even though you're off frequency, get in and jam up the repeater. So that's why 8 through 14 are only half a watt. Now, FRS can be used for business purposes. I am not condoning this, but if you want to hear some fun stuff, especially coming up during the holiday season here, guess what? You're going to go ahead and listen to some of the FRS channels on there, and you will be surprised at what they actually are and doing on there and talking about on there. Some of the stuff that the businesses talk about, I don't know if they don't realize that they're on FRS channels, but it's kind of shocking, like price checks, all these kind of things like that, and some other things that happen. But like I will tell you this, hands down, I love to go to Mall of America around the holiday shopping season. I will take my scanner and I will just sit and I will listen to the chaos that ensues on the FRS bands. And it is absolutely hilarious because I really think, even though your FRS radios are capable of 22 channels, most FRS users, if they're not radio savvy, know channel 1 and PL or CTCSS code 67. So that's it on there. Now, there are restrictions on the FRS. They must be certified for usage by the FCC. So you can't just technically, this gets into that radio police thing, right? You can't just go out and buy like a Motorola or Kenwood or EF Johnson or some business or public safety radio and just put it on quote unquote low power and then go ahead and just use it. Sometimes on UHF radios, low power is only 1 or 2 watts. Well, you can't do that. FRS radios need to have fixed antennas. There are a couple good things on there. Now, I'm going to post this here from Liberty Cave. Garmin, our Rhino FRS and GMRS transmit NMEA 01A3 data, so you can have mapping between Garmins. It's a great feature. Hopefully become non-proprietary soon. The Rhinos are very pricey. 100% agree with you on that. Being a search and rescue person myself, we used to use those, and that's where that quote limited data purposes are, but you can actually exchange positions on the map on there. But yeah, you were talking like $399, $499 a radio, and it was like really expensive. Great radio, hands down, great radio. I still have mine that I use, but yeah, it was really, really, really expensive on there. So that's kind of FRS. So it's really kind of interesting on how FRS has grown. It's kind of, I've heard people say it's kind of like the I don't know, I don't want to say this because I'm going to upset some people, but it was kind of like the hoity-toity CB grade, I guess, as I've heard some people say, because it wasn't AM, it wasn't sideband, you had a little bit more range with it and stuff like that. And then I guess as a disclaimer, you do not get 38 miles on an FRS radio. I'm sorry, you don't. Even if you aren't standing on top of a hill, you are not going to go ahead and get 38 miles out of a 2-watt radio. You're just not. Okay, you're not going to. So let's talk about the next one, CB radio. Now, this CB part here, I will say is dated a few months. And the reason it's dated a few months is because it does not address the new FM aspect of things. So we're working on I'm going to post this here because that's pretty funny. Yes, Chuck, I believe you may be able to get 38 miles out of 2 watts. I stand corrected. But when you're talking and looking at CB radio, we are in that midst now of possibly looking at it becoming FM or working with FM now. Right now, as it takes a look at it, the title 47, subchapter D, part 95, subpart B, 95.903 states, CB radio is a mobile or fixed two-way voice communication service for facilitating personal, business, or voluntary public service activities, including communications to provide assistance to highway travelers. So yes, once again, CB now falls into that license by usage kind of situation. There are restrictions on it. So one of the restrictions that obviously is a big thing with CB is mode of operation, as it was in the past. You couldn't use FM. You can. We're working towards that FM now. We're just waiting on a radio to come out that's FM. But also, too, it's limited on power output. So power output on there, you can only have a max of, I believe it's 5 watts. I probably should have checked that, but I believe it's 5 watts. And that's if you're in a mobile, or that's if you're using a handheld. So it doesn't matter which one it is. It is 5 watts on there. But you have 40 channels, so it's a channelized thing. Now, CB radio is down into the 27 megahertz range. And I think that's important because that's going to be heavily driven by the atmospheric conditions. Numerous things are going to play and affect the signal. Your CB is going to go probably a little bit further at night on good band opening conditions than it would during the day on there. I have used CB myself, especially when I was traveling, and I've heard people that were all the way in Colorado blasting into me in Wisconsin because the band open conditions were right and everything on there. So it uses the 40 different channels on there, 27 megahertz range, as I said. They could be used for business, but due to usage and other abilities, people have kind of steered away from using that. I know up in northern Wisconsin, there was a place called, it's still there. It's not gone, but it's called Louisiana Pacific. And they do, if you ever look at pressed board and stuff like that, construction stuff, you'll see LP. You see it says Hayward. That's my hometown. That factory's in there. What they do is the loggers that come in, they actually use CB radio to talk to the crews that do the unloading of the logging trucks on there because it's easy to do. And once again, obviously, we know what CB is used for. It is used by semi-drivers for communication along the road. Channel 19 is always a good channel for people to use. And I'll tell you this, I didn't know, and anybody who's probably used CB, what was it? And I guess I'm trying to remember, what was the channel things? Because there was one channel that was east and west, and there was one channel that was north and south. And I think CB channel 19 was for east and west, and that kind of became the de facto standard. But it was a channel 18 was north and south. I don't exactly remember. All I remember though from that is Smoking the Bandit, and as far apart as they were, and as far as closest together, I mean, CB always worked for them. It was never scratchy. And to be perfectly honest with you, Buford T. Justice was just, I just had a laugh how his radio always worked. CB radio always worked in his radio. But anyways, CB radio was on there. Channel 6 is a zoo. I can believe that, hands down, that a lot of people, because it can get really crowded. Living near the interstate that I do, I'm like maybe a mile away from I-94. I will sometimes tune my HF radio down to the CB band and listen to stuff on there. And I would be remiss if I did not say that I have not had contacts with law enforcement of a non-professional manner, thanks to the sighting of Smokey. So we'll go from there. Because a lot of people do that. Liberty. CB run logging, or CB or truckers run CB all the time. And it's like I said, it's really pretty amazing too, because I've actually have responded to calls like near the interstate or on the interstate and in my personal vehicle, because there was like a semi on fire, brakes are on fire or something like that. And, dispatch is only good as the information that they get. And what ends up happening is that, like, listening to them on the way to the station or stuff, I was able to hear, we were able to get a better description. They said, caller said at mile marker 28, where you're listening to their truckers and they're going ahead and saying, hey, careful there, someone's got a hot foot at the 26. And then guess what? It's actually at the 26. So it's really, really, really nice on there. And Ape, yeah, you're right. CB practice is very regional. But I think at this time, I've seen a lot of kind of preppers and people coming back and going ahead and getting more and more and more into it. And while I don't condone it or anything like that, I've seen people have magically used a radio, which might be licensed for another part we're going to talk about here in a little bit on this part of the band. That's all I'm going to say about that, right? All right. Let's move on to GMRS. Now, GMRS is General Mobile Radio Service. They fall under Title 47, Subchapter D, Part 95, Subpart B, 95.1703 of GMRS defines it as a mobile two-way radio voice communication service with limited data applications for facilitating activities of individual licensees and their family members, including but not limited to voluntary provisions of assistance to the public during emergencies and natural disasters. Notice how it didn't say business in that case. FRS said business, but not GMRS. So GMRS is not really designed to be the business band on there. What it's really designed to do, and I'll tell you this, GMRS is taking an uptick on a lot of things on there, is that you're starting to see a lot of people use GMRS for the family communications. And listening to some of the GMRS repeaters, it's almost sort of like the amateur radio repeaters, where people are sort of calling out and they're just chit-chatting with friends and stuff, which totally is acceptable. That's a good thing for GMRS. But what's happening is that they're tending to use GMRS, more and more and more, because GMRS does require a license, but it doesn't require a test for the license. Okay. So what happens is, if you want a GMRS license, you basically go online. Actually, that's how you do it. You file it online, go online, enter your information, submit your credit card for $70 for 10 years. So that basically it down to $7 a year. And now everybody that lives underneath your household in your address. So my address here is myself, my wife, my 2 kids. Guess what? The GMRS license covers me. All righty. That's not a bad deal. I mean, considering people put up GMRS repeaters for usage for other GMRS users, some are closed, some are open. I mean, it really, 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 really kind of boils it down to saying, hey, how much, how much you're going to use it, how much you want to use it. As a matter of fact, Halloween yesterday, kids went out, right? Kids went out. They used our GMRS radios on our GMRS frequency that's not really used around here. Now, some businesses use it because if you take a look at it, once again, going back to the FRS radios, 15 through 22, those are actually GMRS frequencies, the output of the repeater. So sometimes you'll hear business on it. And that's where it gets into that kind of tricky little bit of thing on there. But you can, with the GMRS, you can go much, much further. Some of the actual old GMRS frequencies that we use today were actually grandfathered in because they were used by some businesses. And I believe it was Radio Shack had a few of the business radios. I think they were rebadged Motorola's or something like that on there. But if you had some of like the silver dots or stars or whatever, then what ended up happening was that they actually were using GMRS frequency. So some places you'll still hear that, but for most part, it is a kind of a family longer range communications. GMRS licenses can transmit on 8 repeated channels, 8 talk around channels, sometimes once again referred to as FRS channels 15 through 22. It is in the 462 to 467 megahertz band range area. Mobile radios and repeaters can actually put out 50 watts, and handhelds could put out 5 watts. So you could put a GMRS repeater up, and with even a handheld, you can get some pretty good range on things on there. So license costs $70 for 10 years. And once again, covers everybody in the same whole household on that address. So for example, if my dad wanted to get into GMRS, if he went on GMRS, he can't use my license technically. He lives at a different address, so he would have to do that. But then our license would talk. And to be honest with you, GMRS licensure is pretty darn quick. I actually remember I had a GMRS license before, let it lapse, didn't care about it for a bunch of years, kind of got it again. And like it was instantaneous overnight. Like it was like 3:00 in the afternoon, enter my credit card information online at the FCC after I filled out everything like that. Like 4:30 in the morning, it got issued to me. So on there. Good question here. Good question here, Don. Who sells GMRS repeaters? A lot of people are just using repurposed commercial equipment that can do that. And because you'll see when we get into the business aspect of things, it kind of boils down into that, people are strapping mobiles together. There are some companies that do make a specific GMRS repeater on there. Was it Kenwood, I think, at one time? Or God, I'm trying to think who it was now. They actually made a GMRS repeater. I think it was only like 25 watts. And we're going back an old day. Maybe that's not Kenwood. I don't remember. But I do remember like you could only select like the 8 channels. You can just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8. And that was it. You had to get the duplexer, of course, all that fun stuff on there. But yeah, there's a couple different ones. Check it out on there. So GMRS, once again, pretty cool, pretty easy to do and get set up. Now, one band I like here, we're going to talk about is MERS. I love MERS, hands down. MERS is multi-user radio service. It falls under part title or part per title 47, subchapter D, part 95, subpart B, 95.2703. MERS is defined as a two-way short distance voice or data communication service for facilitating business or personal activities of the general public. So MERS uses 5 channels. It is a licensed by rule, meaning you don't need to purchase a license. They're maxed at 2 watts, and they're, like I said, they're 5 VHF channels. Now, of the 5 VHF channels, you're going to find that certain a business or two happens to be on channel 4 and channel 5. I'm not going to say the names of there because I don't want people going out and screwing with them. You're supposed to give them priority because they're actually licensed on that frequency. But it's, once again, 2 watts, short range communications. Now, not a lot of people are up on MERS, but I actually had the FCC, quote unquote, tell me when I was looking for some licensing, had some licensure questions. This is going back years ago, trying to work with a handicap fishing group that I was doing the medical stuff for. We were trying to find out something to be able to communicate with one another. We didn't want to just use marine radios because guess what? We weren't going to do all communications on the water. We were going to do some on land and everything. So like the event grounds and everything. And what ended up happening was that I asked FCC, what's a good recommendation do you have and stuff if we are not looking at getting a license right now and we have some access to radios. And they told me MERS. They told me there's 5 channels of it, 2 watts, you're good to go. Most radios will do it. And yeah, that's exactly it. So you're restricted to that 2 watt limit. But once again, if you're out in the open on the water, MERS goes pretty far. If you happen to be maybe in a certain business area, you might hear some other traffic on MERS. Once again, like channel 4 and 5. But channels 1, 2, and 3 are pretty open. Now, when we talk about, they said data communication service. This kind of goes back to me doing training with search and rescue. Garmin came out with a training dog set called the what was it? Garmin Astro series. And what it did is it basically had a device that looked a lot like the Garmin Rhino FRS combo, but it wasn't. But what it did is it had a receiver on there. The dog had a normal collar, had a little box on the collar, and had a big antenna. And when I looked into it more, I'm like, oh, what frequencies? Well, sure enough, they're using MERS frequencies on there. And you could select channel 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 with the dip switches. And what it would allow me to do is it allow me to run my dog. And it had the Garmin Rhino, look-alike Rhino, I should say, would receive the GPS signal of the handheld device I had. It would receive the GPS signal being transmitted from the dog's collar. And it would actually show me where I was at on the map. And it would actually show me in real time where my dog was ahead of me. So it was great training purpose on there. Once again, if you listen to the MERS frequency, you hear this blip, blip, kind of like noise. And it was just quick little data bursts. So MERS was used for that on there. Once again, I liked playing with MERS a lot. I still do. And it's a great little thing. I will usually use it when I'm traveling with some people on there. I got little MERS radios over here that it's like, hey, we're gonna go on a family trip or something. Hey, here you go. Here's a MERS radio, and we actually get pretty good range in there, and we don't really get interference from there, like FRS, GMRS kind of does. Once again, radio restricted to 2 watts. Interference cannot be caused to other users, especially grandfather users. So that big store that you might buy some Christmas gifts from or whatever. You can't really do that. And these grandfather users are able to conduct communications beyond the restrictions of MERS users. So if they were already initially licensed to that MERS frequency and actually have a license, they can actually go higher power on there. So talking about that next here, I was just kind of reading here. So yeah, it's yeah. So PB, you bring up a good point there. It was sort of like APRS to a degree, but yeah, they were using their proprietary signaling on there, so it kind of sucked. But I mean, I had one time my dog, I would run a lab off lead, and when I'd run my lab off lead, what would end up happening is that I mean, there were times where he was getting almost a good, 16th of a mile ahead of me. And especially going through the woods and everything like that, it was really nice how that data did come back. But yeah, it did kind of suck sometimes on there. Alrighty, so rounding it out still here. So we're going to talk about amateur radio usage. Obviously, I'm going to go through amateur radio usage a little bit quicker because a lot of us in here are actually hams. So per Title 47, Subchapter D, Part 97, Subpart A, 97.3, amateur radio is defined as a radio communication service for the purpose of self-training, intercommunication, and technical investigations carried out by amateurs, that is, duly authorized persons interested in the radio technique solely with a personal aim and without pecuniary interest. You're not taking money for it, okay? So, obviously, can't use it for business purposes, can't really accept money, can't do any of that on there. It does require a license, but the way to get that license is through a test. So it's not like GMRS, not like business. You can't just pay the money, get the license, and go from there. Okay. So with that being said, you have to follow a couple rules with amateur radio licensure. Obviously, amateur radio, we're licensed to the band section. We're not licensed to frequency, so that's kind of nice on there. Amateur radio licenses are issued for a 10-year period. Very simple and easy to go ahead and get back on there. And I mean, that's kind of it. I mean, we have a lot of portions of the band. I mean, we have all the way down to, was it 220 meters now, 230 meters? Again, I can't remember. I know 160 is the lowest I go right now, but all the way up through giga something. I remember long range communications heard being done a big time on there. But amateur radio usage, pretty nice, pretty easy on there. Big uptick in that lately. All right, so now let's go out of the recreational, personal use, family use kind of things, hobby usage. We're going to dive into now the public safety pool. So yes, the public safety pool is a regulated, licensed area of there. So per Title 47, Chapter 1, Subchapter C, Part B on there. Subchapter, let me go here. Subchapter, so basically Part 90.15. Let's go with that easier that way. Public safety radio pool is defined as an area of frequency band that covers the licensing of radio communications of governmental entities and following category of activities as medical services, rescue organizations, veterinarians, persons with disabilities, disaster relief organizations, school buses, beach patrols, establishments in isolated places, communication standby facilities, and emergency repair of public communications facilities. Now, when we hear public safety pool, I will tell you that I'm not usually thinking that. I'm usually thinking police, fire, EMS, but actually the public safety pool does fit into that area there. And I knew of a veterinarian up north, and he's long since passed, but he actually had a public safety radio pool frequency assigned to him because he was a veterinarian and he did calls and he also worked with, public safety agencies. So it really is interesting. Like school buses, they can actually be on a public safety frequency. So, I mean, it's not just, when people hear public safety radio, they're thinking, oh, police, fire, and EMS. No, it actually kind of goes pretty broad on there in some cases. It does require a license by the entities listed above. However, entities not meeting these eligibility criteria may also be licensed in the public safety radio pool solely to provide service to eligibles on one-way paging frequencies below 800 megahertz. So where does, this come in from? This actually comes into a lot of hospital paging. So let's rewind. Let's go back about 20 years into the early 2000s when a lot of places, especially health agents, like hospitals, health facilities and stuff, they would do a lot of different aspects of like paging of doctors and nurses and stuff. And they would be in these frequency ranges, which were technically in the public safety pool. And the reason that they were in the public safety pool is because they were not public safety agencies, but they provided service eligibility to public safety entities. So that makes sense. Like you would like maybe have hospital paging that the ambulance service would get paged out on, but the hospitals that listed in that list I just read you. So it's like, how does that work? How does that go from there? So that's kind of where some of that came from. Now, there are many, many different actual parts to all these Part 90s, 95s, everything we've covered over here tonight. This is just kind of looking at the, quote unquote definition. Now, one thing about public safety usage, it's all across the board. They have ranges in low band, so like 30-ish megahertz, up to 800 megahertz. Those are usually there, and frequencies all in between. So VHF, UHF, 700 megahertz, 800 megahertz, all these segments that are out there for their usage. Now, some of these segments are interwoven into the band. So if you take a look at the VHF band, you're going to see, from, let's just go 136 to 174 now. Okay. And when you're looking at that, you're seeing like, okay, there's a little like 136 to about 140-ish. Okay, maybe up to 144. You see like is government public safety entity. Okay, and then like amateurs 144 to 148. And then you go a little more segments in public safety, business, public safety, business. UHF is a little bit better in that regards because they're in the 450s to 460s, so they're a little bit more defined. There's some channelization of public safety agencies, like there's quote unquote the old med channels, which I don't really know anybody's using those anymore. But then when you get an 800, and if you really think back, remember there was Nextel and the big public safety Nextel thing where they did this whole rebanding. Because what you literally had is you had it horribly like this: public safety channels, business channels, and then you had like agencies like the cell phone companies that were using it. And then the next thing you know is all of a sudden it was just like, man, cell phone companies were interfering, Nextel was interfering with public safety and vice versa, and this and this. They did that whole rebanding. As a matter of fact, I think from rebanding that started like around, I believe it was like 2013 or 2012. I think it was sometimes around there, maybe even a little bit earlier. All the rebanding finally just got completed right now on there. So that's public safety usage on there. So kind of interesting, I think, how it's all works per the different bands on there. Now, the final one we're going to talk about, this is the last one here, I promise, is the business or industrial usage. Once again, per Title 47, Chapter 1, Subpart D, Part 90, Subpart C, 90.31, it is the industrial business pool is defined as a radio pool covering the licensing of the radio communications of entities engaging in commercial activities, engaged in clergy activities, operating educational, philanthropic, or scholastic institutions is the best way to do it, hospitals, clinics, medical associations. Rules as to eligibility for licensing, frequencies available, permissible communications, and class of number of stations, and any special requirements are set forth in the following section. So if you actually go under Part 90 and the Subpart C, you're going to see in Part C, that's really going to be industrial business pool. So there are frequencies that are designed for certain purposes. There's your license, just like with public safety, actually, has to be licensed for specific certain usages. Okay. So if you're actually going to be using an FM frequency, all right, you have to license the FM frequency now as narrowband. But then if you're going to do digital, you can't just like amateur do digital on there. You have to actually get the license class authorized for digital usage. So that's where it comes into that number of stations, the type of digital modes you're using. So that's kind of how it kind of falls into play. It does require licensing and it does require a fee. And usually you have to have a frequency coordinator for the business pool, just like you do the amateur. But unlike the amateur, where it's free, business companies and organizations that do frequency or spectrum management, they are going to go ahead and charge you. They're going to charge you a fee for doing the frequency coordination. And then you have to pay a fee to the FCC for your license for 10 years. So there is a licensure aspect of that on there. Of course, public safety, business, they all fall under that category of basically saying, hey, you can do simplex, you can do repeated operations. They have selected bands for particular operations, once again, interlaced with public safety. And the purpose and intent and options can actually go beyond Part 95 and 97 usage and existence. So, for an example, FRS, you can do business. GMRS, you're not supposed to be doing business. But with public safety and business, more so business, you can be doing all the business you want. You can run an encrypted channel and have you people do business on it completely. And I know some radio systems that are like that, 100% encrypted. They run business operations, everything like that. So lots of options on there. And now, technically, with your business and industrial usage, you are supposed to go and basically you're supposed to be doing business on there. You're supposed to be doing business. I know some people that have actually purchased different business licenses that do a little bit of sort of non-business communications. Like they buy it and they like maybe chit chat a little bit on the way home from work or stuff like that. And so it's quite interesting on there. One of the things, and I want to give a shout out to Ham Radio Dude and Don out there. Thank you very much for that. I'm glad everybody's getting some information out of there because that's kind of what, this whole episode was about. But really, like we talked about on here numerous times, it's so open. And I'll tell you what, I do have an amateur radio license. I do have a GMRS license. I do have a business license. I do use public safety frequencies for paramedic and all those kind of things like that. I do have a CB available to me. I have played with FRS radios. And you know what? The interesting part is it's really all the definitions or designs of what you want to do or what you need to do to communicate with that is going to dictate the type of licenses on there. And it's really up to the individual usage on there. But one of the other things I kind of bring up, and I want to bring up quickly here with tonight's episode, I know we're going a little bit long, but it comes down to the radios, and I'm going to use business and public safety. So for an example, business and public safety radios, they actually have to have specific requirements on the radio. So a good example is they have to have channel stepping at 2.5 kilohertz stepping. And the reason being is because of the 2013 narrowband mandate on there. So narrowband mandates say, guess what? Your radio has to be able to transmit at 12.5 kilohertz and can only transmit really at 12.5 kilohertz in the VHF UHF band. All righty. If you are transmitting wideband, you can only do that with certain licenses. So like amateur or wideband, GMRS can be wideband. Marine is sort of kind of wideband to a degree on there. But if you're on a business frequency, you better be narrowband. If you're on public safety, you better be narrowband unless you're grandfathered in for a specific purpose. Reason, bunch again, is being narrowbanded. That smaller channel step means now we can actually take and put more and more frequencies into a smaller channel spacing on there. Sometimes the amateur radios don't do that. Sometimes other modified radios don't do that. And that's where it kind of gets into a problem because if you're off frequency, you can actually be causing interference on there. So that's kind of where it comes into that whole thing, which probably be another episode on to mod or not to mod. That is the question. So thank you for everyone that tuned in tonight to this episode of Communications and Cigars. I really do appreciate it. I hope this was some worthwhile information to you. Once again, I'm not the radio police. I'm not an attorney. I watched LA Law. That's probably about the extent of my attorney, or Chicago Law when it was on there. But it kind of hopefully clears things up a bit on there because a lot of people have questions like, how does this, or I don't care about this. And there actually is a rhyme or reason to that on there. Now, does that mean the radio police are going to come out? No, it doesn't. But hey, that's what it is. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. Thank you for tuning into my channel. Make sure you check out my other friends that are out there on the YouTube channel. There are a lot of them in the chats there. If you have a YouTube channel here right now, please, please, please go ahead, post it. Take time to pat yourselves on the back. Go ahead and post a YouTube link on there. Go ahead and put it in the chat there. I really do appreciate it. As I said, I'm really excited. I got things coming up here. We're going to be looking at doing actual live audio stream. We're going to be getting into doing some podcasts where we could delve into subjects a little bit more that don't necessarily need the radio on there. And we're going to have some special guests. We got some great episodes planned up and coming that we're going to be coming together. So make sure to go ahead and check me out. Communications and Cigars from Studio B. So B is no cigars. I do have a Macanudo coffee that is calling me right now. So I'm going to say 73s, stay safe, keep communicating, and enjoy your cigars.